Listeners, what if harmony was not something you practiced only in your thoughts, but something your cells could actually remember? What if clarity, emotional balance, and vitality began not with effort but with alignment inside your body? Today's conversation invites us to slow down, look deeper, and reconsider what healing truly means at the most fundamental level. Welcome back to Sacred Harmony, a space where science, spirit, and the human experience meet gently and honestly. I'm your host, Pragya, and today I'm joined by Stan, who is the founder of Quantum Research, whose life and work emerged from a deeply personal promise made in a moment of fear, loss, and fierce love. Stan's journey into human biology, cellular patterns, and healing began not in textbooks, but through lived experience and relentless observation. And in this episode, we explore how the harmony between heart and mind begins at the cellular level and how restoring that harmony can shift clarity, emotional balance, and our sense of inner power. And I know I spoke a lot, but with that, welcome to the show, Stan. It is such an honor to host it today, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, the honors mon, Praga. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
That's wonderful, Stan. And so let's do a context setup at this point before jumping on to, the terms. So, Stan, before we talk about cells, science, or harmony, I'm curious when you think back to the promise that you made during your son's diagnosis. What do you feel in your body now as you remember that moment? And I'm so sure that a lot of our listeners, they also have been through, events of this intensity, or if not of such intensity, everyone has been through something and they probably resonate with this. So, can you just share that phase with us and our listeners?
Absolutely. So at the time when I made the promise to God or to the universe, however you want to look at it, I was in a place of desperation, overwhelm, and it was because uh, I was asked by my wife that am I sure I know what I'm doing? And in that, I my response was yes, and it wasn't true. And I was saying yes because I knew to continue, and I didn't wanna disturb, her thinking, and it was outside of my integrity at the time. So I said yes because I wanted to keep moving on and making sure that I could keep the progress going, but because it was untrue and because I couldn't predict the future, and there's no way for me to know if I was doing everything perfect, then it tied me up on the inside. I noticed my voice just cracked there. It tied me up on the inside, and that's when I went in the other room and I cried, and that's when I said to God, "Listen, if you can help me help him, I will, do whatever I can for the people in front of me." And, I meant it. It was probably my first authentic prayer in a way that wasn't, I don't know, it wasn't just like a complaint or wanting different reality. It was like, I'm really in a place of, "This is out of my hands, and I could use some help." So that's kinda where it came from.
Hmm. There is something so deeply human about that moment. And that is, firstly, I'm so glad that we shared that with us. And I'm so sure all of those phases, all of those moments, they were, big decisions. They required big decisions at that point. And you saying that, yes, you were sure when you were not, it came out of, a decision that shaped everything that followed, I guess. And thank you for sharing that with us, firstly. And yeah, I hope the listeners, they look through it and get inspired by your journey furthermore.
Yeah, it was an authentic being over my head and not having the skills in the moment to be able to speak a truth that was complex. You know, that's not something I feel like I would be at today, but I've had a lot of experience in that. But in the moment, it was totally overwhelming. And it was really that overwhelm that brought me to my knees to ask for help, to be authentic in the next moment. And it brought that promise out of me. And I think that's what that was the journey of value. And it's okay to be overwhelmed. It's okay to have lots of feelings. It's okay to be in love, with your son. It's okay to feel bad for doing your best in a moment. I can have a lot of compassion for that version of me back then that was doing his best, and we can all make things right in the future. And that's why I don't mind mentioning it. There's zero shame in it. But I also know what it's like to face those types of situations, and if I was in that again, I would really address something like, "I can't ever know for sure, but I can tell you my instincts are telling me to do it, and I feel really good about this, and I don't think we, in a way of a choice, we have to try." That would have been, and it also would have been vulnerable at that point to let her hear everything that was in my heart and allow her to proceed rather than me trying to, in a panic, control and push forward. So it's in those types of nuances I find peace. It's not looking back on it in judgment. It's looking back on it and seeing that was an innocent person doing his best, but also in my present, it's a learned version and one that can make it right over time. So yeah, and it also shows the difference between sort of dysregulation and inauthenticity and regulation and authenticity, because as I sit here describing this, like, I'm grounded, I'm in my heart, I'm transparent, I feel super solid. But it's a good reflection. It's a great question because it's a good reflection, looking back on it and knowing the changes between then and now.
That is so, so true. And I totally agree with that, that um, there is, firstly, it's very grounding, all of these situations. And sometimes, as you say, it's genuinely okay to be overwhelmed because it is, again, very human to feel that. And everything human, you just can't ignore it and jump to other things, right? And I totally get that. Now, many people they hear phrases like cellular harmony or heart mahegoko, and they assume it's symbolic or spiritual language, and they probably would just think it's very scientific or there is something in it. So I'm curious what tends to be misunderstood when people hear you talk about this work, because okay, you may explain the meaning of it, but there are so many misconceptions that move on around with it, and I feel those are also to be cleared up. So can you please clear that up for our listeners?
Well, what I'm hearing it from is the lens of your show and the focus on spirituality. How would I approach this question in a way? And, you know, because I play in those three spaces. I play in the body, I play in the mind, and I play with people's connection to source and spirituality. And those things I embrace because I feel it's what's really required for the cells to have the best response. Because what I've noticed is, like during COVID, for example, as we helped people with COVID, all of them expressed a trauma or stress that was going on around the time that it started without me asking. And I saw this as a pattern. And I thought to myself at first, was I seeing something? It was my imagination. And then after a while, I said, wow, there's a common element. But then it was pretty much everyone. So there is, in my view, if we look at the cells and we look at the dysregulation in cells, there usually is an original cause. Sometimes it's like my version is I had a trauma early on in life that I was carrying. A lot of people have traumas that just recently happened. People talk about, oh, I worked really hard for 2 weeks. I'm totally stressed. The next week I got sick. That is a very real pattern. And what I see in the blood is even if you have somebody that has clean, organized cells, and they decide to go into trauma or fight reality or predict the future or the past, not be present, you can tell the difference in the blood, even if it's clean. So, in other words, you could take somebody that's really calm in the morning and then 15 minutes later start complaining about the past and their traumas, and you check their blood again, and it'll literally look inflamed and almost like there's cancer in the blood. And then if they talk it through and they get grounded again, the blood realigns, the cells realign. And I've tested this time and again. So the emotional mind affects the cells directly. In fact, I think the priority of fear or focus on that the body has, the first thing is stress or trauma will affect the cells directly. That can set you up for the COVID or whatever infection can come. And infections have a higher priority than toxins. So if you had the initial things where you were disconnected from yourself or to source, or your faith wasn't aligned with the present reality, or you're fighting reality. So in other words, either spiritual connection or emotional disconnection. The next level in the body to get disrupted is in the cells, that they can get more likely to get an infection. And if you have an infection, let's say chronic infections like fungal infections, for example, they're very chronic in the body. They don't go away. You can manage it, you can lessen it, but most people, it's very hard to completely get rid of it. Well, if you have a fungal infection, like my son was born with eczema, that is a chronic infection that makes him more susceptible to focus on the infection than toxins. And if he gets a toxic insult, he's more likely to go into a toxic spin, or in this case, had a neurological and physiological disorder based on the fact that he was sick to begin with. Now, we could even map his out to probably traumas that happened in utero, before he was born, whether to him or to his mom, and that trauma could even be something I did, and you can map these things out. That the original cause is generally a spiritual or emotional charge first that led to an infection, which leads to toxins. And we track that all day long. So when we're working with people, and I'll read you something that's a quote on the wall that's behind me. You guys can't see it, but it explains what we do. And it says it's a multimodal approach. In other words, we do lots of different things to the mind, to healing the mind, body, and soul on a cellular level. And that's really our approach, because all those things are going to be what get the cells to their best health. And I've seen many times that if people really want to hang on to their trauma and they have difficulty letting it go, their cells recover slower. And you can tell, like I had one guy, I'll say this last thing and pass back to you, but I had one gentleman that was here, a Native American who had been through a lot of things, but he had deep, deep spirituality. And he was like, "Oh, this is just great, and I love it." Everything he loved about it, he was always, positive. And on the third day, which is the third sort of research day, and the fourth day, we just talk about science. But I noticed that during the day, his residual left didn't shift, and everyone else in the room did. And they all did basically similar things. And I sat there and I kind of went inside and just kind of meditated on that for a second. And what I heard in the voice inside me, it said, he's not letting go. And I know from his story, he says he's wide open. But I trust the voice. And I said to him, "What are you not letting go of?" And he said immediately, like really fast, which is a clue. He says really fast, "Oh, no, 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 I'm totally wide open. I love all this." And then I paused, because I like to pause and sort of check inside my heart and in the voice that comes through, what data is there. And I heard again, he's hanging on to something. And I leaned into him a little bit, and I got my voice a little deeper and a little more strong, not raising it, but just trusting. And I said, "What are you hanging on to?" And his eyes didn't come off of mine, and he paused. And pausing tells me that he's checking his heart. He's going deep. It's not a fast brain reaction. It's not buzzy in the head. And he sat there for a second and he goes, you know, when I was an alcoholic 20 some odd years ago, my son stopped talking to me and he still doesn't talk to me. Now, it was deep and he had this deep share and he had emotion behind it and there was a release and we kind of talked it through and it was a circle. So people were supporting him. We didn't do much more that night other than that work. The next morning, his cells looked perfect. And I looked at the cells before I even asked him and I said, "This was really big for you. You got a lot out last night." And he goes, "You have no idea." And I'm like, "We do." And that's symbolic of the work that I see is that there are days, like we're heads down checking blood to remove toxins and infections or whatever it is that we see in our research. It's a private center. And there are times where we spend hours helping people let go of the trauma. And then, for example, I'll have some really high end rabbis or clergy in here that are working on their trauma. And one of the things I let them know is this is something outside of your faith, the boundary of your faith. And they'll look at me and go, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "Well, if it's stressful, it's hard to believe that God's in all things. So this is the boundary of your faith." It's just one example of how to bring people back into the groundedness of understanding that God, the universe, is in all things. And in trauma, in my view, is just how the universe talks to you. It's a surprise. And if it's a surprise where we learn our biggest things, sometimes, excuse me, sometimes we fight the surprise. Sometimes we think that we're entitled to believe that God's way is wrong. Like a little kid gets hurt, or we get hurt, or we lose a limb, or we lose a loved one. But in all things, excuse me, once you're grounded in this belief that all things are here for your learning, all things are pushing you to your awakening for which you were put on this planet for, we see the cells let go because there's extra energy inside the body. Because if you're believing that something needs to change, if you believe that the past has to change, I believe the body believes you and actually even tries to time travel, does everything it can to try to support your thinking, and it just drains the body. But while we're in that quiet place, believing that we know all of everything that's ever happened to us has taught us, that means that everything in the future that happens to us will teach us. There isn't anything to defend. There isn't anything to try to stop. We can get true presence in that space. And when that happens, I notice for me, the room gets much brighter. My depth of understanding people around me and holding space for many people at the same time gets easier because my background window that's open is not searching for what to protect or defend or worry about what somebody else thinks. That thing is saying, we're having a good time. This is all learning. What do I do next? Presence happens, the cells open, and everything becomes easy. And one of my lines that I say very frequently, and I have it on one of the shirts I wear here, is if it's not easy, it's not true. So if it's not simple, and it doesn't matter how complex the issues are, you can break them down to easy in presence and in faith. And when people learn that, their blood looks better, their faces look different, softer, more forward and available. It it's really a beautiful thing. So to answer your question, that's sort of the crossroads of spirituality in here is that it literally is seen on a cellular level, on an energetic level, on people's faces. And when they walk out of here and we've helped them, their blood is sort of like the history database of all the times they were outside of their faith, all the times they were outside of believing all things are okay. And so we're taking care of the past in the blood and the present in the stress and spirituality. And those crossroads, I think, are one of the reasons why we are so incredibly effective at helping people see who they can really become, what their real potential is. Because most of us, most of the 7 billion brothers and sisters we have are not running at their full potential. And when I learn these things because of the love of my child, um, I I became maybe even more in love with the fact that everyone has the same thing going on to some degree or another. And I don't want people to hurt the way I hurt. I don't want people to be minimized the way my son was minimized. So for me, it's very easy to get very little sleep sometimes and just to do this all day long because of my compassion, my love for people, and these whatever God-given skills or abilities that allow me to help the people around.
The work that you do is it's powerful. It is a groundwork for people who, do not have people to encourage them and to, help them with their issues. You've worked with blood, you've worked with, people, their experiences, and it speaks through. And thank you for sharing that, because a lot of our listeners, they need to, sometimes just one sentence or just one story, it, hits the spot wherein there is this whole questioning of, okay, do I want to grow through this? And do I need help through this? It comes up. And thank you for that. Now, even with all this awareness, you've shared your experience, you've shared your trans experience. And even with all of this, setbacks do happen, right? Life is not linear. It can't always be, happy, happy, jolly, jolly, even after you overcome from the biggest setback of your life. Yet setbacks are yet to happen, right? So old patterns, they return, stressors, they resurface. So from your perspective, what helps people sustain harmony rather than falling back into survival mode? And what helps them come back to their self, when their healed self, their harmonized self?
Yeah, it gets hit. Yeah, so I'll give you an example. A recent one for me is that the center that we have right now, the research center we've had for maybe 7 months or something. Prior to that, I bought a property to do this work in, and it's an acre property on a lake. It was perfect for that. I was very attached to the beauty of the trees and the yard and the breakthroughs that we were getting there. Well, it turned out the people in the neighborhood didn't like the number of cars coming in and out, didn't like the Amazon packages coming in and out. And they just didn't like change, you know? In my estimation, I'm not inside them, so I can't know for sure. But basically, they rebelled against me being there. And it was kind of heartbreaking because it fell into like my old ways, codependency. When I lost my mom, I just wanted love. And so I had this old pattern of wanting their approval. And I had this fight or flight feeling like, you're attacking me. Should I try to convince you? Should I try to do this? Should I try to do that? And I noticed I was kind of up at night with this. Now, in the past, that's the kind of thing that it could take a year for me to recover from as codependent because I'll probably never have their approval. But when I felt that pattern, I remember the feeling and I try to tell myself, remember this feeling. What did you learn last time? And what are you here to teach? And, like, I become my own student at that point, And what I thought about it is that, "Oh, well, there's a lesson in this. There's a path I didn't see. There's something that's gonna happen that's gonna be better than even what I'm thinking." And I said to myself, "Oh my god, but I'm so attached to this house. I've got all my money tied into, this place moving in this direction." And, that's the old voice. And I said, "Well, God wants something different." So we looked for a place, and one of my staff just looked at all the rentals and said, "Try that one." And it was a warehouse essentially. And I walked in and I had a feeling that it was like, we can make this work. And then I also thought to myself, what would be the benefit if we did? Well, if we can make, an inexpensive warehouse space be warm and beautiful and be able to do our work in, we could do this anywhere. So I would have never done that if I stayed at the house. If I would have stayed and tried to convince, if I would have, like gotten an attorney, or if I would have, pleaded with people or had a public event where, I'd stand up and say what we're doing to try to, like I could have gone the other way. but I used it for guidance. And as soon as I started to, the anxiety in my chest left. So it would have taken me a long time to process. I probably was uncomfortable for 2 days. And then we found a spot. And within 3 weeks of that day, we were open. And we had clients the whole time. And we're only a team of like five. So with five people and clients, we, laid, we laid foam down and carpet, and we made the place almost exactly how it is right now. And people love this space. And I could do this in Dubai in a warehouse. Like, our rent is like a dollar something per square foot here. And I learned so much, and it was something that was in my blind spot. In other words, I was not passionate about doing this, but I saw that this was a learning I was supposed to have among the rest of the learnings and the stress. You could call it stress, the busyness. It wasn't really stressful for me, but the busyness of my day, I wouldn't have done this. Well, God does things for you that you're not ready to do for yourself. And I'm grateful that I have this space. I'm also grateful there's always benefits. I get to go back to my house and I don't have clients all over the place. I don't have to deal with that. I can walk around however I want to. I don't have to think. I don't have to, just be downstairs and stay away from folks if I want to get some rest. So there's so many benefits that happened. And because of my experiences, because of how I program myself, that I changed my thinking. I changed my, like, I used to be a programmer when I was a kid. It was one of the things I taught myself from the beginning. I feel like I'm programming my own operating system to say, remember that feeling. Here's your approach, and it's logical. What do you do in this situation? What's the thing? And I check in my heart. What feels calmest for me? Where do I feel a light shining? And it was, let's go do this thing. And I was full force into it. 3 weeks it took us. We pulled out rugs, we painted, we installed, a kitchenette, we got hot water installed. We did all these things, an air conditioning system. We put up a wall. We did all these things in 3 weeks. And, I tell people, without even saying, by the way, there was no professionals. These are just people, just my staff. We did all this. I had one guy that put up the wall that had some construction experience that was a client, but we pulled all this together. And that experience was stunning, beautiful. And here I am, out of my house in a space that I love, and it's a benefit. And so we do get pings from our heart if our head, um, does the old pattern. It's not our heart, in my view, that's ever the problem. My heart is telling me the truth all the time, but it's saying it so powerfully, so loudly, that my head may not have a solution yet. And then once I understand this is something I haven't really sat with yet, and I need to put some time into this to figure out what my heart's saying. Once I do that, it becomes a very simple process. And like I said before, if it's not simple, it's not true. If I could have seen complexity in trying to get the neighbors to change, or I could see a very simple solution, which was it's time to grow and do something that I would have procrastinated doing because of my attachment to the house. And what I do with the house is now I'm like, well, I don't know. Maybe I'll keep it. Maybe I don't. Maybe I need to downsize. Those things will happen, in time. But I can tell you my life moves in that flow way faster, way more often. The things that would trigger me and would keep me up at night or have me spinning for a long time, that stuff is pretty long in my past. And I'm so grateful for that because I know in my cells, my downtime in my cells is much shorter. And because of that, my health is better. And, I had somebody come in here this week that it had been 8 years since I saw him. And he walked in and he goes, "You look better than 8 years ago." And I could see that he had like this look on his face, like he was puzzled. And I'm like, I don't say anything. I just kind of nodded, gave him a hug, and moved on. But in my head, I know it's like because I'm healthier today than I was before. And it started with my mind. It started with my lens. It started with my approach. And it started with my spiritual connection to knowing that everything is okay. It's always been okay, and it's going to be okay. And I can use my brain for troubleshoot for puzzle solving, rather than worry, rather than defend. And it's a much better life. And I'll wrap it with this last thing. I used to say to myself, because I did a lot of work with Byron Katie, who's an incredible master at stress reduction. I could reduce my stress in that world. But I used to say to myself, "Where'd my joy go? Where's my joy? I can't find my joy." I have more joy now than I've ever had probably in my life since I was a child. Uh, there's more happiness and joy in my life than I've really ever had, and I'm producing and performing at a level that I've never had before as well. And that really comes from the practice of understanding that all things are for you, all things are here to teach you, and I'm going to use my brain for what it's there for, solving problems. I'm going to use solving, challenges, puzzles, and I'm going to use my heart for what it's there for. It is the dashboard to my life. We used to have dashboards back in the day that would say check engine and nothing else. That's what we think our heart does. But when we sit with it and we learn the nuances of how we feel and we reflect and we wait and we ask it for to tell us more, when we wake up with our morning wisdom, we'll find that this heart thing is so smart. It tells you the truth and it tells you depth, but it requires you to sit with something so powerful that it can scare the hell out of you, and it can even make you defend. Like when my mother died, I just had a bunch of love. Grief is the tantrum. Grief is like, I want her longer. I want God to do something different. But love exists, and right now, I have a picture of her behind me. I bring her up almost every day in one way or another, like a call like this, and I get to love and continue to love as if she was still alive in New Jersey and just out of my view. And I get to talk to her and I get to listen to what she has to say to me in my mind, and I'm at peace. And I know that she died on time, because if it wasn't for her dying when she did and me marrying when I did and having my son when I did, there are certain researchers I would have never met, because the one I'm thinking of, Elaine Goshaw, she died a year after I met her, and she was it's so important for me to understand food and the science of food. And I wouldn't have met her had I gotten my way back in the tantrum days. And then guess what? I don't think God responds to tantrums. In other words, I don't think grief has to be a form of expression of love standing up against God. Grief can turn into just understanding. I have a huge acute case of love, and I need to find better methods to continue to love, even though I don't see the person in front of me. So, with that, things have gotten much easier. And each time I learned something, because I know there's only about 240 possible traumas in life. I've documented this. One's called grief, another's called betrayal, for example, another is called, dis-ease. Okay. And once I sort of master the experience of one, let's say grief, or another, which is like I could view my neighbors as betrayal. I could also view it as being ridiculed. Once I master that once, if it happens again, I have an experience base to call on that helps me in my puzzle solving. And life gets easier and easier once you understand the elements of this dynamic of being human.
That was beautiful, Stan, and that was a great realization, great groundwork for our listeners again. And Stan, at last, for listeners who feel, called to learn more about your work or explore this deeper, where can they find you? Just let them know so that they reach out to you.
Two places you can go are stansrecoveries.com. Stans Recoveries, it's plural, Stans Recoveries. And that's a set of 200 and some odd testimonial videos of this work. People that right after they had their breakthroughs, shortly after anyway, had a chance to be able to share what they went through as best as they can. And it's hard to describe. And then the other place is stanslinks.com. That'll give you links to different ways to learn about the work or hear some Spotify stuff that I've thrown out there for free just so people can have bits and pieces of me after they've been here. So it's a good place to go. Stan's Recoveries and stanslinks.com.
Listeners, that is your way to reach out to Stan. And thank you, Stan, for sharing your story, your insight, and the depth of your work so openly. And to our listeners, may this conversation invite you to slow down, listen inward, and remember that harmony is something your body already knows how to return to. Until next time, stay gentle with yourself and keep choosing sacred harmony.